Very good evening, everyone, to today's Gyanavardhini series, which is hosted every Wednesday by Foundation of Data Protection Professionals in India, FDPPI. We warmly welcome all of you. Today with us, we have speaker Karthik Subramaniam. He is an IT strategy and transformation leader with nearly 2 decades of expertise in cybersecurity, risk management, currently CISO and a chief customer officer of Atlas Systems. Atlas Systems provide technology solutions to help organizations in their digital transformation journeys. They have offices in India and US as well. So today's topic, Comply Score, is an AI-driven approach to third-party risk management. Over to you, Karthik. The stage is all yours. We look forward for more engaging discussions today.
Thanks, Anita. So, thanks for giving us an opportunity and present our complex core solution here. And I would like to keep this discussion more discussion based. So if you have any questions as we move along, please feel free to stop me and ask away your questions. And for today's topic on integrated third-party risk management solution, we'll cover 3 areas. One is what is happening in the TPRM world today and why has TPRM come into forefront for many organizations, especially organizations which are more driven by compliance and regulations like financial industry or a pharmaceutical company. And then how Atlas, we are positioned to support those enterprises or organizations and how our solutions make it more efficient to, from a compliance and regulation perspective and manage the third parties in a better way. So before we start, just to set the context, right? What is a third party? Who are third parties? So most of the organization in the current world are either work with another organization, another vendor, be it a subcontractor, or be it a solution provider, right? So any individual or an organization that engages with the enterprise in either to provide a goods or service or conduct business activity, they are termed as third parties. It's a more of a overarching concept, which includes your contractors, the suppliers, the vendors, anybody. So it's an overarching term is called a third party, right? And why is working with third party a risk? Working with third party is not a risk, but at the same time, as an organization, we need to be aware of the risks that the third party brings to the table. And with knowing the risk helps us to mitigate the risk, right? So some of the facts in the recent past, right, within a study, it's a recent study that was conducted by Poneman Institute in the US, right, attributed almost 61% of data breach were caused by a third party, right? That's an alarming figure, right? And then with COVID coming in, if you see in 2020, almost 83% of the organization suffered a third party incident, which is like 60% more than what they faced in 2019. So that is a direct reflection of the COVID and the supply chain disruptions that brought in third-party relationships and the risk to forefront, right? And also the recent study by IBM, the cost of breach report attributed a single data breach on an average cost an organization close to $4.3 million. And third-party involvement in such a data breach is one of the is in the top 5 as biggest contributor to the cost amplifier, right? So I think these numbers kind of talks to why it is important for organizations to look at third-party risks and manage those risks more efficiently to minimize any disruption in service and most importantly, to the reputation to the organization. And what is causing these risks, right? And what are these challenges? The TPRM landscape has changed dramatically in the last few years. Earlier, if you see from a more of a compliance industry perspective, the risks are not just related to anti-bribery or anti-corruption, right? So especially when you're talking about to a financial client or a pharmaceutical company, the entire third-party compliance or regulation is more aligned to anti-bribery, anti-corruption. But now the risks are emerging. For example, ESG, the reputational risk, so those are getting the entire landscape of TPRM risks and the impact to the business is changing every day. Okay, not just to mention the threat of data breach, the ransomware attacks. So what has happened is put undue stress on the organization, not just enable them and prepare them in such a handle such an event, prevent and handle such an event, but also make sure that the third parties that they work with are well prepared and they have adequate controls in place to either to prevent or minimize the impact of such ransomware or data breach incident that happen. And the vendor ecosystem currently is not just limited to third parties, right? That we all saw and experienced during the COVID times when the supply chain took a big hit, and that's where we got to know like it's not just a third party, but there is fourth, fifth, and tenth parties that are involved in operating a business or delivering a service or a goods, and then how that brought in more into financial and reputational risk for an organization. And also the emerging trend is more on the social governance, ESG part of it. So if as an organization, if you have a goal to say, okay, we will achieve from a governance perspective, this is the goal that we want to achieve. It cannot be just achieved by the organization by in itself, because we are in a world where like it's a co-competitor, right? So we work with our different entities, we outsource some of our work. So our goals are get passed on to our third parties or vendors at whom we work with. And that way we cumulatively achieve our goal, collectively achieve our goal. So that becomes even more important to have a visibility into the controls and the performance of the third parties whom we are working with. So a little bit of background about Atlas. So we have been in the industry for last 20 years, and our core strength is in bringing in a very personal and tailored approach to all the engagements and the solutions that we offer. Okay, so when you talk about tailored solution, the tailored solutions are more aligned to the industry verticals. Like for example, Complex Core, we have two industry solutions, one for the financial industry, especially the banking industry, the another one is for the pharmaceutical industry. Reason being that these two industries are highly regulated, right? So the workflows, the terminologies, everything out of the box can be deployed and leverage anybody in the banking and pharmaceutical sector. So those are two industry solutions that we bring in. And again, like Samyukta mentioned, we leverage technology like AI and ML to simplify and make the process more efficient, especially in the compliance and security space, be it in terms of threat detection, tracking real-time risks posed by the third parties, or for the what do you call from the enterprises in itself. So that's why we leverage our technology to make it more efficient and robust. So what do we do from Complex Core perspective, right? So earlier, if you traditionally, right, when you talk about third party risk, like Samhita mentioned, yeah, we are going to onboard a vendor. So we say, okay, we will assess the vendor every year, every 2 years, depending on the service that they provide, right? But a risk doesn't wait for 1 year or 2 years in the current world. So how do we monitor the risks in real time? And how do we get those insights to proactively have a mitigation plan in place, right? So that is where compliance score comes into picture, where we leverage AI to basically streamline the entire risk identification and assessment process, right? So with some of the features like real-time scoring based on the data that we get, say for example, so if you have a customer and the customer defaults on a payment, right, the credit score goes down. So the impact, so this is a uh, financial information is a publicly available information. But if you're consuming a service from that vendor, that's going to affect your risk posture as an organization. So how soon you're able to get that information helps you to prepare contingency plan, put contingency plans in place, right? So that is how, so that is one of the case study. And the second thing is like you mentioned, the early detection, right? The risks are not just from a information security perspective. It could be a legal risk, or it could be a financial risk. Say, for example, a supplier of yours planning to file for a bankruptcy. So it did happen, like last few years with during the COVID period, there were a lot of suppliers who filed for bankruptcy, right? So how does it affect your organization? How does it impact your customers, your reputation, right? So that is where we use some predictive analysis and real-time data that we get from our partners to and enable the organizations to bring in the transparency and the visibility into what's really happening within the third-party ecosystem, and how does the and where do they stand from the risk posture perspective, and what are the mitigations that they need to have in place to handle any eventuality, right? That's the whole concept, and how we are trying to redefine how organization look at third parties and manage the third parties more effectively. So any questions before I move forward?
Yeah, sorry. Just one small observation. Do you have within the checklist you talked about the vendor? Do you have vendor offboarding included in this?
Correct, yes. So thanks, you led me to my next slide.
Oh,
So how we
sorry.
do
Okay.
no. So I'm happy that we are on the right track, right? So thanks for validating that. So how do we do it, right? This is how we do it. We take a very holistic approach to TPRM. Okay, the holistic approach, we confidently say, not only looking at the third party, but also the services that the third party provides to an organization, and we cover the end-to-end life cycle, right from, say for example, most of the government organization, most of the enterprises have this like uh, vendor evaluation process, right? So how do you evaluate a vendor? What are the parameters that you use to evaluate a vendor? So that is what we call as a due diligence. Even before you engage with the vendor, we provide you a quantitative score to say, okay, these are the scores of your vendors that you're planning to work with, and then based on that, make our organization's life much easier to make decisions, right? More of an informed decision. And then right from onboarding a vendor till offboarding, all the steps in between, we cover the entire life cycle of the vendor. Say, for example, like Kamal asked, yes, we do have a checklist for offboarding. It's just not a checklist, right? Because as a solution, let's say, for example, you're working with a vendor A and you're terminating the contract. So as soon as you trigger a offboarding within Compliance Core, it has a built-in workflow and integrations to trigger the next step. Say, for example, send a notification to your accounts payable to settle the final invoices if there are any final invoices due. And if the vendor has any accounts within the system, it will trigger an alert to your IT team to deactivate all the accounts, right? So that is what you're talking about when you talk about an integrated TPRM solution. That's where the integration comes into picture. We just don't look at vendor as a separate entity, but we look at vendor as a part of your ecosystem, and every stage of their life cycle within your organization, we integrate in such a way that the risks are minimized, right? That's what we do. So right from onboarding, we assess the system. So once you upload the SOW or the contract, the system with AI and ML technology, it analyzes the contract and see what are the KPIs, what are the contractual obligations for the vendor. Do they have any access to the data? Based on that, it enables the tiering of the vendor based on the service that they provide and service that they provide. And based on the tiering, it triggers the assessment. So the assessment again is contextual. Say, for example, if the vendor has access to PII data or a PCI data, then the controls that will be applicable for that vendor will be completely different from a vendor who just provides a janitorial service, right? So all this, which traditionally used to be a manual process, is all automated and made possible through latest technologies that are available in the market today. Okay, and then once the assessment is complete, then comes the evaluation, right? So a vendor may say, yes, I have all these controls in place, but how do we test it? How do we make sure that's actually in place? That's where the evaluation comes into picture. Again, when you talk about evaluation, we do it in a more we leverage technology, but also we trust humans more in that process, right? So we have our own team to basically validate and test each and every control that is provided by the vendor to make sure that they are effective and they are working, right? And then we follow on with the risk monitoring, right? The monitoring element is continuous monitoring. So like, for example, we have integration with some of the financial data providers like DNB, S&P, some of the security, external security risk providers. So using these information, and we have hookups with the government systems. So using these integration, what we do is we continuously monitor the vendor's performance, not just from the contractual perspective, but also from a risk perspective, and keep the risk scores and the mitigations updated. And whenever there is a change, substantial change in the risk posture of a vendor, we immediately notify the concerned business entity, and also not just tell them, hey, there is a risk, but we also tell them in a systemic way that, hey, here is the risk, this is the control, and here's what we have asked the vendor to implement to mitigate that risk. So that's the entire uh, you know uh, cycle of how we manage risk from a third party perspective. Kamal, did I answer that question for you?
Yes, very well said. Just cross-checking. Does it mean that you send the information out you check it internally as well as externally?
Sorry, can you
I
just
said the
repeat that?
assessment. Is it carried out internally as well as external, or?
So it's the internal assessment. So in this case, since we are assessing the third party, it's always we assess the third party,
Okay.
right? And there is also, say, some of our customers, what they do is, given our expertise in the subject, uh, they have also reached out to us to say, hey, can you assess us to see how robust is my TPRM program? How robust is my information security program? So that is a service that we provide to certain customers on request.
Thank you.
So, I think we have a question here, if you want to take that. How do you take confirmation from vendors on data deletion post offboarding?
Sorry, it was a bit fast.
Do you
What is the
take,
second part?
okay, yeah. How do you take confirmation from vendors on data deletion post offboarding?
So very good question. It's a very interesting topic, in fact, right? So we ask for evidencing. So what we do in most of the cases is we have our audit team. We send them over to the client premises to more of show and tell, validate it, or in most of the cases, we do a remote session where we see the deletion happening ourselves.
Great. Okay. Hope that answers. Yeah, we can move ahead, Karthik, please.
Yeah. So again, the everything that we do against the five areas of TPRM, everything is mapped to the industry standard framework, be it NIST, be it GDPR, right? And in fact, I know India is coming up with their own cybersecurity law and the privacy law, right? So the team that we have constantly looks for all this development that is happening. One is a framework, one is a law, right? So we have our team which consists of finance, legal experts, and as well as the risk SMEs who constantly understands what is happening in the industry, happening in the world, and kind of updates, keep our solution and the processes that are implemented in our solution up to date, right? So that's how we be relevant in the market. So again, how do we provide this holistic approach is through our integrated third-party solution, right? So we have 6 core modules within the solution, which is risk management, the vendor governance, right? So vendor governance, contract management, impact analysis, policies and procedure, and incident management. So policies and procedures, basically, we need to, if we are asking a third party for a control, then we need to have a policy in place, right? So it's a full-fledged policy and procedure management system where it's a centralized repository of all the policies, procedure for an organization, and that becomes a serving point for the third parties or any entity that they work with the company, right? So when we say a third party is not conforming to a regulation, we know to which policy within the organization they are not conforming to. So there is a direct traceability into non-conformance. Same way, the business impact, right? So what happens to the business if a vendor doesn't exist tomorrow, right? And so the thorough has the ability to capture all the impact of a business or an entity, as it could be as simple as a device like a laptop to an employee, right? And what is the mitigation that they have in place? And also most of the organization do have a mandate to do a BIA every year, test the BIA every year. So everything can be done in a more systemic, transparent, and most importantly, audit ready manner within the system. And we are talking about vendor governance and contract management, like I mentioned, uh, we leverage AI and ML to not only assess the risk for the vendor, but also more towards providing insights into how the vendor or the third party is performing and living up to their contractual obligation as stated in their contracts, right? Say it could be in terms of the budget, it could be in terms of the uptime SLA, or in terms of the quality of the delivery. So that is how we bring a unified solution and provide a single pane of view for our clients to view, track, and manage the third party's performance, the risks that they bring to the table, and the status of the mitigations that they are working on, and also thereby reevaluating their risk posture based on these external influence to the organization. So now talking about compliance score. So like I mentioned, we are redefining the TPRM standards by leveraging latest technologies as well as the SMEs, the talent that we have, right? So compliance score as a solution is currently being used by almost 7,000 users across 65 countries. So it's multilingual. And we have till date carried out, administered through the system more than 100,000 assessments. And we have an active database of more than 13,000 vendors in our system, right? So that kind of talk to the core of uh, the system and the level of usage of the system we have. So any questions?
Karthik, we can probably have at the end. I cannot see anything in the chat box currently.
Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. So
Okay. So yeah, the forum is open for questions if anybody has. So Karthik, if you have time and if you have something open, can you just show us the flow, how the particular your system looks like, and probably how this particular vendor assessment goes through?
yeah, just I can show some dashboards and screens.
Sure.
At real, for say for example, so this is our like what you call as uh, our dashboard, which is widget based. So we have from a system perspective, we have the ability to kind of the users have the ability to customize what they see on the screen. So it could be like when they log into the application, like what is that they would like to see, right? It could be in terms of the risk scores or the status of the assessment, the status of the vendors. So they have the ability to see everything in one unified in a single pane of view, and which is completely customizable by the users. And the risk scores that you see here and the risk summary that you see on the top right, this is again the assessment questionnaires, the assessment areas are again customized, are tailored for each and every customer, because no two customers are alike, no two clients are alike, right? They are maybe could be based on different industry, different regulations, and different frameworks that they use. So we make sure that um, any entity, any client who we are onboarding to the system, we understand the business, and we ensure that the workflows, the processes are all customized and tailored for that particular individual and for that business. And having said that, the risk scoring, it's completely automated. Okay, so what it means is, say, for example, when you are onboarding a vendor, we typically have a intake questionnaire. That's common in the industry. So once the client or the business completes the intake questionnaire, the system will automatically evaluate, assess the risk score, and also the risk areas, right? That is be based on the services the vendor is providing to the customer, and based on the risk score and the risk areas it determines, will automatically initiate a security questionnaire, or the assessment questionnaire across the different areas. So again, so in this case, there are 5 areas. So basically, the company information is basically the intake questionnaire. We assess them on finance, legal, security, and sustainability. So these are the 4 areas where where a third party is assessed on, right? So, and then we do two types of risk. One is the inherent risk and the residual risk. So inherent risk is typically at the vendor level, how they are structured, and the residual risk is basically on the services that a vendor provides.
Karthik, this is Ramesh here. Quick question. I know when you can talk about the inherent risks or the aging of the risk per se, is there any chance that the vendor is not onboarded at all, basically because either of the history, what of the individual, or there is a potential violation from that vendor?
Sorry, Ramesh, can you just repeat that question? When the vendor is not onboarded?
No. Even before onboarding the vendor, would you be even possible to check his legacy or other systems to kind of validate?
Correct. So what we do is more of a due diligence, right? Say, for example, when a client, this is a typical workflow that we have. So say, for example, when you say, if you decide to onboard a vendor, let's say Atlas Systems, right? So first thing is we we see our repository, whether we have worked with a vendor before, whether we have that vendor history in our database. If you don't have it, then we integrate with what we call as exchange, right? There's another concept called vendor exchange for systems. So we integrate with that system to see, okay, whether this vendor whether we have the history of this vendor in terms of the financial standing, the legal standing, and everything. And also, what we also do is we integrate with some of the government system. Say, for example, like we have, if it is a financial customer, we run the entity and the directors of the entity through the what you call as a OFAC list to make sure that they are not blacklisted in any of the government systems. Only if all those checks are cleared, then they will be led to onboard.
Okay.
So we have a question here. How does AI help here, or probably how these AI is helping here?
So we use AI here on two aspects, right? One is more of looking at the historical information, historical data of a particular vendor, and ability to, I would do more of a predictive analysis based on the patterns that we have seen from the historical data for the vendor. That is one. And the second thing is, so for example, if a vendor is from a particular country, there are certain other risks associated with that, right? Say, for example, in the US, there is a CPI score that comes out, what is called as corruption perception index, that changes from country to country. So that also has an influence on the risk that is posed by the vendor, right? Say, for example, like 2 years back, the CPI score of Russia might be better than today, right? So these are some of the different data points that are fed into the system, which is taken into consideration by a AI model to kind of predict and provide some intelligence to our clients to make a better decision.
Okay. There's one more question coming from Kamal. Is there a specific department which owns TPRM?
It's a super question. Okay, we deal with it all the time. So like you see, right? So in a typical, so TPRM, to short story, yes and no. Okay, if you're talking about a third party, typically it is managed by a procurement team or vendor management organization. Okay, but there are different, it's a collaborative effort. If a third party, if a procurement team wants to bring on board a vendor, they need to work with the finance team, the legal team, the compliance team to make sure that all the boxes are checked, right? And that is where compliance score comes into picture. Bring all the departments together, make their work more workflow based, streamline the processes, bring that visibility. Say, for example, if compliance team is saying, oh, this vendor is not didn't cut it or make it, then why did the vendor did not make it? Okay, bringing in that transparency and bringing that collaborative effort to make sure that as an organization, we minimize the risk posed by a third party.
Great, that's a good one. Okay, we have one more question. Subride is asking, privacy and ESG, you have separate evaluation methods. Question is methodologies for assessing these risks. Or as you mentioned, there's a combined thing, right, that you've mentioned right now.
Yes. Those two are different, especially if you talk about privacy. Most of the EU, they follow GDPR, right? And now the trend that is evolving right now is most of within the US, I can speak up to is most of the states are coming up with their own privacy standards. Say, for example, California started this trend by enacting Right to Forget Act, right? So now you would have heard this was there all over. The state of Montana was one of the first state led the way to ban TikTok videos, right? So, and then there are a lot of states that are coming up with the privacy law. So we are taking privacy is in itself is separate. It's not going, I don't see privacy being one unified law, like how we say NIST is a framework, right? It's not going to be that. Every state is going to have, every country, every state is going to have their own privacy laws. So that's how we treat them. And and ESG is an evolving space, right? It's still evolving. So there is a lot of forums, the groups that are trying to define what does ESG matter to an organization and how are we going to measure. So it's an evolving area.
Right, right. So we have one more question coming from Reena Bangeri, ma'am. Security posture reassessment periodically, is this always to be owned by InfoSec team and DPO team? What is the best practice for compliance tracking ownership in an organization? So how do you see this?
So if you're talking about information security, we are talking about data security, it is best to have it under the information security office, right? So because if you're talking about banks, right? So if you're talking about PCI compliance, the CISO, the CIO and the CISO have to sign off on the saying that they are PCI compliant. It's just not technology anymore when it comes to data privacy and
Right.
security.
Right. Perfect. Okay. So I was very inquisitive to see if you have any, these assessment forms ready with you, so we could see from a privacy perspective. We have a lot of audience here from privacy offices. So how does your questionnaire looks like, or probably how is the process that is followed? Just to have a more deep dive into the process, if you have something ready.
Sure. So I will be more than happy to share something on the security side.
Sure.
Okay, so what kind of reports that you have. So let me start. All right, you able to see the screen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a system. So this is a system generated report. So after the assessment is complete, the evaluation is complete, the system will automatically generate a closeout report. And again, all the closeout reports are audit ready, right? So most of our customers in the financial and pharma industry, what they do is whenever their audit cycle comes in, they create a guest access to their auditors. They just log into the system, look for the data flow, and then take evidences and they go, right? So that's how robust and audit ready our system is. So basically we talk about the methodology, what kind of methodology we use for assessment, and and then the summary of what are the major areas that we found there is a gap, and what is the risk posed by the third party. Again, the risk could be either a high, medium, low, or it could be a score. So it's configurable depending on the client's preference. They choose either one, and then a nice summary of what are the uh, how many controls were assessed, and what were the controls that were assessed, how many were satisfactory, how many were not satisfactory, and what are the findings of each of what are the findings, and then also a detailed mitigation or the recommendation plan that is provided to the third party to say, okay, and the best part is any control, all the controls are mapped to a standard. So that way, there's a complete traceability, and that way we kind of standardize. So the same report can be given to, an audit firm so that it is valid. So they don't have to do, redo the entire audit again, assessment again. So that way we say, okay, what is the observation and what is that we recommend the vendor does to remediate it, and the system will automatically come up with these remediation plans. One of the best thing is, for each, since all the assessments are tied to a framework, whenever there is a deviation, we know what is causing the deviation and what are the controls that we need to put in place to remediate the deviation. So the system will automatically come up with the remediation plans whenever evaluation fails for a particular control area, and then notify the vendor about the remediation plan, define the timeline, and then you know send them reminders to make sure that the issues are remediated in a timely manner. Does this help?
Yes, 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 absolutely, absolutely. This is really great. So, any other questions? I can open the forum. You can please ask anything that you want to. The floor is open.
Yeah, just one small matter. You've explained all the other matters. How do you see this as a life? What is the life cycle, would you say? Couple of years or 3 years or yearly? I think you've answered somewhere, but it's just something I wasn't sure about. Sorry.
So it's on the assessment, you mean the assessment cycle?
Yeah, the risk management life cycle, I would say.
Okay, so the cycle is based on the tier, right? So typically, most of the organization tier their vendors. This is the service that they provide. Tier 1 from 1 to 4, 1 being the highest. So any vendor who is rated as tier 1, they go in for a annual assessment cycle. Okay, so tier 2 is either every year or every other year. Tier 3 is every 2 years, and tier 4 is whenever there is a change in the risk portion. So there's a change in the risk portion.
Okay, thanks a lot.
The SSA 16 mentioned, I guess, is just a reference, right?
Just a reference, yes.
We have moved on to 21 now, I think. Right?
Yeah, it's
Just
just
become 18 and 18 has become 21 now. Yeah.
18 and 21 now, yes. So yeah, so that is so this will might be of interest. Let me share this one. So this is just a simple risk management dashboard, right? So here in this case, if you see, these are the various categories through which a vendor is assessed, and all this rating is systemically generated. There's no human intervention at all, based on the response provided during the intake questionnaire and the assessment questionnaire that the answers provided to the questionnaire. The system automatically determines the level of risks rating, as well as whether the vendor is subject to certain controls in those categories.
Karthik, Ramesh here again. Suppose if it is required to be customized for the region, say I know that this mostly focused as of now in US. So, for example, if you want to get this done in India or maybe in any other pack stations, does it need a lot of customization, or how easy is it to take it forward?
No, we don't need much of customization. Like I said, the system is currently being used across 65 countries, right? When we talk about 65 countries, given it's a TPRM solution, it is already comes with local regional specific compliance requirements, frameworks. Say, for example, if it is in India, it's KYC, right? Know your customer. The processes, the framework is completely different from the KYC that we are using in US. So out of box, some of the standard frameworks and regulations that are used across the different countries are provided as part of processes and frameworks within the system.
A curious question. Are there any customers in India for you?
So we have global customer base. So most of our customers that are in the US have a big presence in India, and they are using the solution to manage their third parties and risks in India. India-based third parties and risks.
I know, I don't want you to name them, but do you see any risk with the Indian vendors?
Risks are there for everyone. I won't
Oh,
just,
I
I
get it.
don't just call out India vendor, but yeah.
Thanks.
See,
No,
if
that's
there's
it.
no risk, then we are not in business, right? So it is
Yeah,
like,
yeah, that's true.
so yeah, the risks are there. Again, so risks are not just attributed to what we see. There, like there are a lot of other risks. Say where simple change in a policy may trigger a big change. Say, for example, if you, I don't like 2 years back, if I'm not wrong, India changed. There was a policy change or a proposed policy change that was brought in by the government, Indian government, to say all data process like credit card processing by foreign entities, like for example, Chase or American Express, the data should be stored within India, right? So that was a simple proposal for a change, but what happened was it kind of blocked out most of the payment processors. They kind of said, no, you can't use a card in India. Most of our cards didn't work in India because they decided not to fight against that policy change.
Okay. There is an interesting question. Sriharsha is asking it. Do you track the GST compliance of Indian vendors? Because I know it's more specific to India.
That is, we are working on it. We don't have it right now, but our that is planned for Q4 this year as part of the standard feature in the product.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karthik, for that insightful session. We are having, okay, there is one more question coming up. Just you have to answer that one and probably we can close. Is your product integrated with MCA in India?
So
yeah.
We are actually working on the integration. So anything with respect, see, with India, the GST or the MCA, there are few new initiatives that are taken by the Indian government, which you are aware of. So we don't want to have a cookie cutter approach of, okay, I'm compliant with MCA or I'm compliant with GST. We are looking at it in an overall, at a holistic view. And there is a new product version that we are planning to roll out in Q4 of this year, which will be addressing most of the regulations that are being lined up by the Indian government.
Great. Thank you, Karthik, for that invaluable session and insights. Over to you, Ramesh, for the vote of thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Anil. I know, thanks for everyone for joining the session today and listening to Karthik. Good to see that Karthik brought the perspective about not only the global standards, basically from the Indian perspective as well. Again, we know some of us practicing the ISO certifications and assessments are being CISOs in various organizations. Third party or vendor risk is a big risk. And again, we have seen that in various sessions. Initial statements, he kind of brought up the numbers showing that 60% of violations are not compliant is a big deal. I mean, that cannot be acceptable in the organizations. They make huge risk for them. I'm sure the complex core is definitely helping most of those customers globally. And yeah, Karthik, thanks for talking us through this session and then walking us through, making us comfortable, saying that yes, not only global, we are also getting Indian standards integrated. I'm sure you'll see more Indian customers going forward your way directly there. Thank you for your time and then being with us. Hope we'll get time to speak once again in a different subject on this space. We'll invite you and hope you'll be here for some time.
Sure, definitely.
Thank you all.
So much.
Thanks all for joining it, because as I said, this is not only India. I think we've got some global teams as well. That's really a good session for us to be here. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.